Good morning, everyone. Yes, the lesson's going to start. Kaya, how long have you been here? Yeah, everyone, if you don't have them right now, please get headphones or earbuds. We're still missing quite a few people, but that's fine. They'll miss out on the fun stuff. Um, so, there we go. We're going to talk today about Punnett squares and some genetic stuff. So I found a lot of kind of cool videos that we'll check out to kind of go along with that. So before we do that, I found some kind of cool activities that we could do to follow up on our lesson from 2 weeks ago, our last zoology lesson. Do you remember what our last zoology lesson was about? Let's see if anyone remembers that far back. Yes, it was 2 whole weeks. So let's see if anyone remembers. Yes, eyes, ears, mouth, and nose. Correct. So we talked about a couple of things last week to do with like taste, like those miracle berries and everything, which unfortunately, because we weren't in school, we couldn't mess around with. But we'll definitely do something with those later on if we get the chance. So before we get into the new stuff today about Punnett squares, I wanted to go over some stuff that I found that relates to what we were learning about last week. Let me close my office door. My wife is making food right now. Okay, so everyone should have their headphones in. And we're going to play around with this thing that's called a 3D surround sound test. Hello, Jack. Thank you for showing up. So make sure you have your headphones in. This thing's kind of loud, so I'm going to start the volume kind of low. But what we're going to see here is something called 3D surround sound. So I'm going to give you all another second or two to get your headphones in. Okay, let's hold off with the highs and everything. I'm sorry, Jack. The link is going to be in this PowerPoint, or in this Google slide, so you can come back and do it later if you have some headphones. This thing's only a minute or so long. So if everyone has their headphones in, we'll go ahead and start this. I'll get the audio adjusted, or the volume adjusted. So let's check out 3D surround sound, then we'll kind of talk about what's happening after that. So here we go.
Welcome to a demonstration of three-dimensional sound. In order to achieve the most convincing effect, we advise you to close your eyes. The sounds you're about to hear have been recorded using binaural technique. Binaural technique differs from mono, stereo, and surround sound recordings in that you can determine the exact distance and direction of a given sound. For instance, if I walk around you, you'll be able to locate my voice while I'm talking to you. And if I drop my keys and pick them up, you can determine whether my voice is coming from below or from a source that is right next to you. By use of virtual sound sources, a variety of effects can be applied, enhancing your experience of being in a different place. In addition to the effects conveyed by the separate sound sources, all kinds of atmospheres can be created.
Okay, so like I said, it was a pretty short video there that demonstrated something called 3D surround sound. So for anyone that didn't have headphones in, that probably didn't work quite as well. But for anyone that had headphones in, I'm curious, what did you experience there? How would you describe that? So a couple people just said cool or wow. So what was happening? And also I'm curious if anyone did that with their eyes closed, because it is completely different if you have your eyes closed when that happens. So people are saying wow and weird. Someone describe briefly what happened there. What did you experience? Oh, so Noah listened with his eyes closed, because there wasn't a visual part of that. That was 100% sound. Yeah, so the one part that really creeped me out is when she comes up and says, I could be like right beside you kind of thing. Yeah, so with your eyes closed, you were kind of convinced almost that the sound, or that someone was moving around you in the room. And this is what's called 3D surround sound. So where sounds are coming from, our brain is really good at using the kind of patterns that those sounds make to determine where the sound is coming from. It's why if you ever, have your eyes closed and someone is talking, you can tell if they're in front of you or behind you, or to the left or to the right. That's why our ears, human ears, we have one on each side of our head, one on the left and one on the right, and we can balance those sounds out. So I really like this kind of experiment that shows that 3D sound. So as far as the what is happening, you heard these sounds kind of all around you moving, and like you could feel like someone was almost right next to you, or like she was walking away from you. Go ahead, Sam, if you have a question. So what I want to know is, how is this important? Why does our brain have the ability to do this sort of thing with sound? Is that why one ear is higher than the other? I have not heard that before, actually. Is that true? Hold on, let me look that up. Oh, I don't think that it's. I just did a quick search for it, and it seems like apparently sometimes that's just like your face isn't perfectly symmetrical, but I don't. The first thing that I read doesn't say there's any point to that, but that's interesting. Apparently, it is a thing that happens sometimes. So Kaya said it helps you. It absolutely does help you. Think about if you were somewhere where it was really, really dark, or if you were someone that didn't have your sight, if you were someone that was blind or had really bad vision. Your sense of hearing can kind of step in to replace some of the missing information. If I can't see where something is, maybe I can hear where it is. Yeah, owls have offset ears. They have a really good sense of hearing that allow them to know which direction something's coming from. So that was an example of 3D surround sound, how our eyes can actually help us determine where things are around us. Go ahead, Kaya, if you have a question. Move on to the next one. I'll give you a second to ask your question, and then we'll watch another video that kind of talks about your ears. Actually, while you're writing your, isn't that? Yeah. So Kaya said, isn't it when you're blind, your hearing improves? I've heard that as well, and a lot of people say if you lose one of your senses, your other senses will step in and become a little bit more powerful to help you, to kind of help make up for the sense that you're missing. Yes, you can take off your headphones now, Octane. Okay, we'll watch another video that kind of talks about hearing and our ears. So let's check this one out.
Many of us have become quick to catch illusions that trick our eyes, but how often do you consider illusions of the ear? Are you really able to trust your ears and the things they hear? For example, listen to Greg speaking.
Bar, 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 bar.
What do you hear? If you heard bar, 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 you'd be right. But how about now?
Bar, 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 bar.
Chances are you heard far, far, far this time with an F, except you didn't. In fact, the audio didn't even change between the two videos.
Bar, bar, bar.
Strange as it may seem, what you hear depends on which video you're looking at. Go ahead, take turns watching each video and see how the sound morphs.
Bar, bar, bar.
This is a perfect example of something called the McGurk effect, which shows how our visuals can alter what we believe we're hearing. Now I want you to count how many times you see a circle flash on screen. Let's do that one more time. Did you see it flash twice? Many people do, yet without the sound, it becomes clear that the circle is only flashing once. In this case, the sound has altered your perceived vision. The next one works best with other people around. I'll play two tones, and you tell me if they're ascending or descending. In other words, are the notes played from low to high or high to low? Listen to this. Which was it? How about this one? Write down what you heard for each number and let us know in the comments. Chances are, if you compare with enough people, you'll all have different answers. Surprising? Try some more. And this one. How is it possible that you're hearing something different from others? It's an auditory illusion called the tritone paradox. It's created in such a way that the tones contain both a higher and lower frequency in them, but our brains have a preference of which to listen to. Diana Deutsch, the creator of this illusion, found that your geography and language from infancy all play a role in deciding this preference. Finally, listen to this audio clip of a gradually climbing tune. And yet, if I play the exact same clip back to you, it will sound like it's only continuing to climb higher and higher. I swear this is the exact same clip I just played. You can rewind that section of this video over and over and check for yourself. Try it. Each time you start it over, the tune is seemingly climbing even higher. It's called the shepherd tone illusion, of which there are many variations. In it, multiple sine waves are played on top of one another, raising in pitch, while one quickly drops down an octave as the others continue rising. But our brain doesn't notice this drop, and so the clips sound like they're rising forever. These illusions may help to explain how something like music can have such a profound yet varying effect on our minds, which we discuss in our New ASAP Thought episode here, along with the question of whether or not music can save your life. There's a
Okay, so some other kind of pretty weird stuff that your sense of hearing can do. Noah pointed out that the one at the start where he was saying bar, 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 if you looked at the one where his lips were coming together, like buh, you heard a B sound, but then when they played the exact same sound, but you saw him going f, like making an F sound, you would hear far, far, far. So that again goes to show you that your hearing and your vision are related. When you are listening to something, what you're seeing is going to kind of affect the way that you interpret that sound. So again, there's a lot of really cool things that you can look at, little videos and clips of like audio illusions, things that mess with your hearing like that. So I thought that was kind of cool after a lot of the stuff that we talked about the other week with sound and how sound works. Oh yeah, that Yanni Laurel thing. I remember that from like a year or two ago where everyone heard a different word. Okay, so we talked about some of the hearing stuff, but I also found some visual stuff. So before we get into this next one, I will let you know if you're someone that gets like car sick or motion sick, or if you get, headaches or get dizzy really easily, you might not want to watch this one because it's one that kind of messes with your vision a little bit. So you have been forewarned. We'll watch a little bit of this, but these are going to be visual illusions. So for this one, we're going to watch a little bit of this one. The video is really long. I think I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit because if not, it's like almost 2 whole minutes long. So we'll jump ahead a little bit. But basically what it's going to ask you to do is stare at the dot in the middle of this picture for about a minute or so. And then we'll see kind of what that does to your vision. But again, if you get headaches really easily, or if you get motion sick, you can, just hang out for a minute. So here we go. Oop. I clicked the wrong button again. I do that all the time. All right. I said we'll jump forward a little ways. Okay, so just stare at that red dot right in the middle. Keep staring at that dot. Don't look away. Music's just kind of annoying. We'll get rid of that. So keep staring at the dot. Any minute now. Any minute now. I forgot how long this video is. Any minute now. Now look at something else. You can look at anything else in your room or anything around you. Oh, that's so weird. Oh, I'm looking at my computer monitor. It looks like it's melting. So I want to know what was happening there. What did we just, why did that happen? Or what did you experience when you looked away from your computer? What did you see? Octane said, wow, cool. Even the video looked weird? Yeah, so the video was that kind of really weird pattern of black and white lines. So what was going on there? Why did that happen? I'll just keep it running. Actually, I'm gonna mute it. So what did you see when you looked away and looked at like something on your wall or whatever? What happened? What did you see? Yeah, the actual video did as well. So that's the entire point. What's happening is while you're looking at this video, and I'm going to pause it real quick, you have all of these lines that are moving around in really weird shapes. It's not something that your brain is really used to seeing. So your brain is trying to make sense of what's happening in that picture. So Kaya said your brain was getting used to the thing. When you look away, it takes a second to reset. Absolutely. So you're looking at this kind of weird moving picture that's moving in a really similar way every time. It's a really repetitive kind of motion. And your brain starts to get used to that motion, so it doesn't, feel as weird to look at. And then when you finally do look away from it, your brain is still trying to make sense of all that stuff moving around, so it keeps everything else in your vision moving. I love this kind of stuff. I think that's really weird. In fact, I love it so much that I found another one. So we'll check this one out as well. It's unsettling and cool. I agree. So these are more optical illusions, so more things that do with our vision. So this is I think that, the timer in this one's shorter, so it's 20 seconds. So this one will do a couple of different ones, and some of these are kind of funny. So here's the first one. So just stare right at that red dot. Ooh, that's weird. Ooh. Elephants got really wobbly for me. Alright, another one to check out. Ah. Ooh, so that one, the picture is kind of stretching in and out. We'll do one more. Looks like the red dot's spinning to me, but I don't think it is. That's weird. The music is good. Well, I'm good. I'm glad you're enjoying at least one part of it. See what kind of picture they're going to have for us to look at. Oh, that's so jarring. Okay, so there's, I think, one or two more in that video that you could check out. So just like we saw with the auditory illusions we were looking at, your brain is trying really hard to fill in the kind of gaps. So it's trying to take all of that weird moving screen and make it make sense. Then when you show a normal picture, your brain is still trying to process that kind of moving screen. So it can be very kind of weird to look at. This one, unfortunately, is not something that we can do over the stream, but it is something that you should come back and check out later on. This is something called speech jamming. I'll go ahead and follow the link just so you can see how it works. But it takes you to a page like this that's going to do a... Oh, that's weird. I'm gonna have to go away because it's double talking. You can maybe kind of hear it through the headphones, but what it is as you're talking, it will play the words you're saying. Ooh, that was weird. There we go. We'll turn that part off. Yeah. Oh, it's hard for me to talk. So what's happening? You all can't hear it. Okay, I gotta go away. It's making it hard to talk. Okay, I had to go away from it. It was messing me up. But what a speech jammer does, is as you talk into your microphone, it plays the words that you're saying back to you just a little bit afterwards. And for whatever reason, I don't know why, it makes it impossible for you to talk. Like you heard me just do it. I started talking and you just start stumbling over your words. So that's called a speech jammer. There's apps for phones as well that do the same thing. But again, you have to have headphones for that. Yeah. When I did this with the last group, we kind of went around and took turns trying it. And some people, it didn't really seem to bother them. And other people, like I remember Audrey, got really weirded out by it. So it's a lot of fun. But that's another one that you all can play around with. This would be a fun thing to do, maybe as part of your follow-up work. Show this to, some of your family members or friends if they wanted to check that out. And try to figure out, why is that happening? Why is it so hard to talk when you're using that speech jammer? So we're going to get into the new activity for today, which is talking about dominant and recessive traits. So basically what we're going to talk about today is how, not just us, not just people, but every living creature really, plants and animals and bacteria, everything, how they get their traits. Traits are the things that kind of make up your body. The big one that people always talk about a lot is eye color, and we'll talk a little bit about eye color today. But there's a really cool system that we use to determine what we look like, and how, things like height and eye color, and even it helps to determine a lot of things that you can't see, even things like personality, can be determined by this stuff to a certain degree. Kaya said she's going to make Avani do the speech jammer. That's cool. So first, talking about what are genes and alleles. We talk about like genetics and everything. So for genes are what are called a molecular unit of heredity. Heredity is things that are passed down to you. Kaya, if you have a question, go ahead. So genes are something that are in your DNA. We talked about DNA a lot earlier in the year. DNA is kind of the blueprint that makes up your body. So when we're talking about genes, they are the things that make up your DNA, determine what you look like and how you act, and help your body, grow and design and build itself, basically. So it says at the bottom, a unit of heredity which is transferred from a parent to offspring and is held to determine some characteristic of the offspring. So things like the example we just talked about, your eye color, is determined by your parents, the genes that they're carrying. Kaya says, isn't that when you subtract your mom's height, your dad's, and do something, you get the approximate height you will be when you grow up? So I used to hear that same thing, and that's not exactly true, and that's what we're going to talk about today. When it comes to something like height, both of your parents, because you get one gene from each parent, or one allele it's called, you get one allele from each parent to determine what your height is. And depending on what type of alleles your parents give you can determine your height. But adding or subtracting your parents' height that's kind of a rumor. So alleles are the one that we're going to be focusing on a lot today. So humans get 2 copies of every gene, 1 copy from each parent. So you get 1 allele from dad and 1 allele from mom. The 2 copies are not always identical, and each of these variations is called an allele. For example, if a gene contains information for eye color, one allele might code for blue eyes, while another might code for brown eyes. So if you have one parent with brown eyes and one parent with blue eyes, you could get different combinations of alleles from them. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So each of your parents give you 1 allele, so then you have 2. And then later on, when you have kids, you will give 1 of your alleles to them. So it's almost like flipping a coin in a lot of situations. So alleles are these individual blueprints you get that determine how you look and develop. You get 1 from each parent. And then what we're really going to look at today is the way that those 2 different alleles come together. So if you all are still doing the speech jammer stuff, you need to close that and focus on this. You can mess around with that stuff later, but not right now during the lesson, please. I actually don't remember what this link goes to. Oh yeah, perfect. I do remember what this goes to. The Amoeba Sisters, always amazing. They do a really good job of explaining what these 2 things are. So we're going to check this out, and then we'll start doing some examples of how we figure out alleles and do Punnett squares. So here we go.
I don't remember which grade it was where I learned something about my taste buds that can never be unlearned, but the event in the lesson with genetics has stuck with me forever. For you see, I learned that my taste buds cannot taste PTC. PTC stands for this. We'll stick with PTC. And it's a chemical that can be sold on these paper strips. It can be purchased under the name PTC paper, and it's popular in genetic classes because it has this fascinating quality. Some can put it on their tongue and immediately say, yuck, this is bitter. And some people, when they place the paper on their tongue, taste absolutely nothing. Well, unless you consider the paper. Does paper have a taste in itself? That's a debatable question, but the point is some people can taste PTC, and some people cannot taste PTC. And I was really disappointed because I remember that I was the only one there that could not taste it. So there was everyone getting this amazing science experience, and I couldn't taste a thing. Well, there may have been more than just me that couldn't taste it in the classroom that day, but they didn't seem as concerned by the fear of missing out of the PTC paper as I was. I remember someone trying to make me feel better, saying, "Oh, but it tastes bitter. You're actually lucky." Then they try to describe what it tasted like to me, but it's not the same. I guess I'll never know for myself what it would have tasted like. Of course, the reason PTC paper is used in genetic classes is because the trait of being able or not being able to taste PTC is based on genetics. A reminder from our Intro to Heredity unit that genes are portions of DNA, and they have the ability to code for a characteristic, a trait, like being able to taste or not to taste PTC. Now, we do want to point out that many traits are actually coded for by interactions of more than one gene, like eye color, which is quite complex and determined by interactions of many genes together. In fact, the ability to taste PTC or not may involve some other gene interactions. There's even different ranges for how bitter the chemical may taste because there may be more kinds of alleles than we'll mention. More about that later. But since we do know that the ability to taste PTC or not taste PTC is at least heavily impacted by a specific gene, it does make it powerful for genetic classes. One thing I have found so interesting is that my parents can both taste PTC. So why can't I? Recall that humans have 46 chromosomes. Chromosomes are made up of DNA and protein. It's a condensed unit of DNA. My whole genetic code is represented by these chromosomes. You inherit 23 chromosomes from your mother and 23 chromosomes from your father. Here's all 46 of them right here. As you can see, there are 23 chromosome pairs. Each pair has one chromosome from one parent and one chromosome from my other parent. If we focus on one of these pairs of chromosomes where the PTC taste sensitivity gene may be found, we can see an area where the PTC taste sensitivity gene could be. Let's assume this is the locus where the PTC taste sensitivity gene is found. See how it is pointing to a specific area here? That's because it's on an area of the chromosomes that refer to a specific gene that codes for a trait. Now, remember how this chromosome is from mom. This one is from dad. Each parent contributes an allele, which is a variant of a gene. An allele is a variety of a gene, a form of a gene. The alleles could be the same form of the gene or different forms of the gene, but regardless, in this case, they're forms of the gene involved with PTC taste sensitivity. So, if PTC taste sensitivity is being used as a one-gene trait example, and as we mentioned, it may not be that simple, then your DNA code has a gene related to PTC taste sensitivity. Together, the two alleles you inherit, the forms of that gene, determine the trait of tasting PTC or the trait of not tasting PTC. That gene is involved with coding for taste receptors on your tongue, and the receptors you have can make a difference for whether you taste PTC or not. The alleles are typically represented by letters. Since this is all about tasting, let's use the letter T. But wait, it matters whether I represent it as a capital or lowercase letter. If I use a capital letter to represent an allele, it means that it's a dominant allele. If one or both of the alleles you inherited for a trait are dominant, then it will be expressed. More about that later. If I use a lowercase letter to represent an allele, that means it's a recessive allele. Recessive alleles are typically not expressed unless there is no dominant allele present. Now remember that you have two allele copies, so the combination you could have here could be big T, little t, or little t, little t. These are called genotypes, your genetic makeup. Genotypes can help determine a phenotype, which is a physical characteristic. You'll notice when writing genotypes, I put the capital letters first, if it contains a capital letter. That's not because the order matters, it's a formatting formality that capitals are written first. It turns out that being able to taste PTC is a dominant trait. That means the phenotype, which is a PTC taster, is due to a genotype that includes at least one dominant allele. So which genotypes can taste PTC then? Well, big T can. Both of those alleles are dominant. So can big T, little t, because remember, it only takes the presence of one dominant allele. In fact, the only genotype in this simplified example to not be able to taste PTC would be little t, little t. So obviously that is what I am. I am the little t genotype, which results in my non-taster phenotype. But my parents can taste PTC. So what genotypes would they have to be? Well, if they were both big T, that wouldn't be possible. If one was big T and one was big T, that still wouldn't be possible. Remember, you have to get an allele, a form of a gene, from each parent. If my parents do taste PTC and I do not, then my parents have the genotype big T, and their phenotype is PTC taster. Punnett squares can be used to determine the probabilities of offspring having certain genotypes, which then can be used to determine their phenotypes. But Punnett squares are for another Amoeba Sisters video. Before we end, one more thing to mention. In this example, the dominant trait of being able to taste PTC is more common than the recessive trait of not being able to taste PTC. And one could jump to an assumption that dominant traits are more common, especially since it only takes the presence of one dominant allele to show up in the phenotype, at least in Mendelian inheritance. But the dominant trait is not always more common in a population, because it's possible that the dominant allele itself is more rare. That can be the case with some forms of polydactyly, that is, being born with extra fingers. Some forms of polydactyly can be a dominant trait caused by the presence of at least one dominant allele. However, the dominant allele may not be as common in the population, and the condition of having extra fingers is generally rare. Well, that's it for the Amoeba Sisters, and we remind you to stay curious.
Okay, so I know that was a whole lot of stuff, and what we're going to do for the next little bit is kind of do some examples of that, but it's actually a lot easier than it seems. What it basically comes down to is all of the genes in your body. You get one from your mother and one from your father, and then the type of gene that you get from each of them will determine your different traits. So that's what we're going to look at, are some more examples of that. All right, this was bumped out into YouTube. There we go. So the first thing they talked about there was dominant and recessive traits. And they used uppercase and lowercase letters for that. So let's look at dominant first. So dominant means that this allele will be expressed if it is present, and it was represented by a capital letter. So if you get, let's say that we're looking at, to use the one that Kaya used earlier, let's say that we were using height. If, let's say that being tall is dominant and being short is recessive. So we would use a capital T for being tall and a lowercase t for being shorter, because that's the recessive one. So if you get a dominant gene from your father and a recessive gene from your mother, you're going to see that dominant gene take over. You're going to be tall, because that taller one, the way that I think about it, kind of like what they said in the video, is it's almost like a stronger gene. So that stronger gene will take over. If there's one dominant and one recessive, you'll see the dominant trait. So for the recessive genes, recessive alleles or recessive genes will only be expressed in the absence of a dominant trait. So again, if we're looking at height, if we have one dominant big T and one recessive little t, we're going to see that dominant trait. We'll see someone be tall. But if we have two little t's, two recessive genes for being short, then we'll see someone with shorter height. So we use a lowercase letter. Which letter you choose to represent an allele doesn't matter. You can use A, B, C, D, whichever one. The important part is that the dominant one is a capital letter and the recessive one is a lowercase letter. So this is really the best way to look at this, using eye color. This is what is called a Punnett square. It's the title of our lesson, P-U-N-N-E-T-T, square, because it's a square shape. So in this situation here, you are using your two parents to determine what your eye color could be. So here we have one parent who has brown eyes. Capital B here is the symbol for a dominant brown eye. So brown, big B, is dominant. The little b here is for blue eyes, but it's recessive. So this person here has brown eyes because their genetic type was one dominant brown eye and one recessive blue eye. So they have brown eyes. Same thing over here. The other parent has one dominant brown eye and one recessive blue eye. So they also have brown eyes. So in this situation, both parents have brown eyes. So what we can do here is figure out all the different combinations of eye colors that their kids could have. So remember, each parent is going to give up one of their two alleles. So this parent has one big B and one little b. This parent also has one big B and one little b. And it's kind of random which one they give up. So if this parent gives up their brown eye allele, and this parent also gives up their brown eye allele, the kid will have brown eyes. Yeah, like a finger chart, or the something I didn't even know existed before I started teaching at a Montessori school. The way that you do, there's a math system that you all use that's very similar to this. Can anyone think of a math system you all use that basically uses this exact same setup? I saw a bunch of people get lessons on it earlier in the year. I still see a lot of people use it. No, nobody? Think about like the lattice system. Yeah, there we go, Sam, lattice. So this works the exact same way. We have our two possible options on each side. So like we said, if both parents give up that big B, that dominant gene, the kid will have brown eyes. Let's say over here, this parent gives their blue eye gene, this parent gives their brown eye gene. Because brown eyes are dominant, that person's going to have brown eyes. Same thing down here. This parent gives their brown eye gene, this parent gives their blue eye gene, their child is going to have brown eyes. But see, both parents here are carrying, they both have that recessive blue eye gene. If they both give up that recessive gene, their kid could have blue eyes. This is why it's possible for two parents with brown eyes to have a child that has blue eyes. Yeah, Octane, that's exactly right. Is if you get a big B, if you get at least one big B here, it doesn't even matter what the other one is. You're going to have it. Kaya, that's exactly right. The probability here, if these two people had a child, there's a 75% chance they're going to have a child with brown eyes, 25% chance they're going to have a child with blue eyes. So let's look over here. If someone has blue eyes, they have to have two recessive traits. Because remember, if this person had a big B, had a brown eye allele, then they would have to have brown eyes. So anyone with blue eyes has two recessive alleles. Does anyone in the lesson today have blue eyes? Let's see, Veronica said, my mom has blue eyes and my dad has brown eyes, and I came out with brown eyes. So that would mean that you got a brown eye allele from your dad, whereas your mom only. So we know for a fact, because Veronica said her mom has blue eyes, which means, so this one is perfect for Veronica. Veronica's mom had blue eyes, which means that she had little b, little b. Veronica's dad had brown eyes. Now for your dad, we don't know if his was big B, little b, or it could just be big B, like here. But either way, you ended up with brown eyes. Go ahead, Sam, if you've got a question. So yeah, here brown and blue is 50%. So if one parent has brown eye, or has blue eyes, it means they have two recessive traits. The other parent has brown eyes, but they have one dominant trait and one recessive trait. There's a 50-50 chance. So while Sam's typing his question out, I want to know, what if we had one parent that had blue eyes here, little b, and one parent here that had brown eyes but were big B, big B? What percent chance is it that their child will have brown eyes or blue eyes? Sam says, is it possible for 2C recessive trait people to have brown eyes? What do you mean 2C recessive? Noah says he has blue eyes, his dad has blue eyes, and his mom has blue eyes. That's perfect. So that means both of your parents were little b, little b. So the only possibility for you was to have blue eyes, like blue and green. I'm still a little confused. It's possible to have two recessive trait people and have brown eyes. So what you're saying is, if like exactly what Noah said. Noah's mom and dad both have blue eyes, which means they're little b, little b. So there are no brown eye genes for him. There is a 0% chance of Noah having brown eyes. Same thing like what we said down here. If one parent has blue eyes and the other parent had brown eyes, but their genetic type was like here, big B, every single one of these squares is going to have a big B in it, meaning that there's a 100% chance that child is going to have brown eyes. Kai said both my mom and dad have brown eyes, and you also got brown eyes. So yeah, you got two dominant traits. Orion has a question as well, so go ahead, Orion, then we'll move on. This is pretty complicated stuff. This is like high school level biology, doing these like Punnett squares. But it's such an interesting thing to see, because what it really comes down to, there's 4 options you've got when it comes to eye color. I'm in the same boat. I have brown eyes. My father has brown eyes, and my mother has kind of greenish blue eyes. I've got brown eyes, and my brother has eyes that are kind of more similar to my mother's eye color, kind of greenish blue. Go ahead, Kaya. And Orion I'm waiting on a question for her as well. So we're going to be practicing a lot with these Punnett squares today. Octane said, is it more common for at least one parent to have one of each? That's a good question. I'm not really sure what that would be. Now, I know the most common eye color in the United States, at least, is brown. But I don't know what the rate is of people that have, both dominant traits versus one dominant, one recessive, like what we have here. Sam said, what happens when a person has two different eye colors? So we talked about that the other week. That's called heterochromia. Hetero means different, and chromia means color, so it's different colors. That is generally a mutation or a mix-up in their DNA where, these signals get crossed and they have maybe one eye that's showing that dominant trait and one that's showing a recessive, but that's obviously very rare. Orion said, my parents have green eyes, Eshbal has brown, Shoham has blue, and I have hazel. How's that possible? So that's exactly what we're looking at here. Your parents, so green eyes are a mutation. It's not a natural, it doesn't fall naturally on this list of brown or blue. And again, this is a much more simplified version of this. There's a lot of other eye colors kind of in between brown and blue. But green eyes are a mutation that can affect either the dominant or the recessive one. So someone that has green eyes, especially two people that have green eyes, their offspring or their children can have any number of eye colors: brown, hazel, blue, green. It's kind of like at that point, they really, any combination is possible. Even though it's rare, what if your mom has one brown and one blue eye and your dad to have green? Oh, I don't even know. I don't know how you'd even draw a Punnett square for something like that. Everyone in Sam's family for 3 generations has green eyes. That's pretty cool. Green eyes are, I believe, green eyes are the rarest eye color. Okay, so looking a little more at Punnett squares. First of all, where did these come from? How did somebody figure this out? Basically, how it started was a guy that was looking at different types of pea plants. I don't know if you all like peas, the vegetable peas. But he started looking at how breeding different types of plants together would affect them. And what he found out is he took some plants here, one tall plant and one short plant, and then they got bred together and they created a tall plant. And he did that over and over and over and realized anytime he mixed a tall plant with a short plant, the plants came out tall. So that would mean in this situation, tall is the dominant trait in pea plants, right? Because if there was a mix between a tall plant and a short plant, it would always make a tall plant. Then as that tall plant started growing, he realized that there were 3 tall plants on average. It would make 3 tall plants and 1 short plant, which kind of goes back to what we were looking at here, where if you have a plant that has tall and short, there's a 75% chance of getting a tall, a dominant trait, and a 25% chance of getting a short one. Exactly, Kaya, 75%. So what we just did here with eye color, he actually originally figured out looking at pea plants. So there's a video in here you can watch if you'd like that kind of talks about the scientist that discovered this. We're not going to watch it now because this would be a cool thing to do for follow-up work to kind of learn about this guy and the experiments that he did. There's another video here you can watch that talks about inheritance that goes into a little bit more about how you inherit not only physical traits, but it can also relate to things like we said, sometimes your emotions, or in this situation could even be different diseases or illnesses. If you think about people that wear glasses, if someone has 2 parents that wear glasses, there's a higher chance that the child will need to wear glasses. Or if you have 2 parents that have asthma, there's a higher chance that their child will have asthma. Or if you have 2 parents that have the same food allergy, there's a higher chance that their child will have the same food allergy. Go ahead, Kaya, if you have a question. So that kind of talks about here how those would work when you have someone that's unaffected by something or is affected by it. So braces, yeah, like the way that your teeth grow as well. If you have 2 people that have, perfectly straight teeth or were born with perfectly straight teeth. Because, if I had 2 parents that had really uneven teeth and then they get braces to get them put on, that doesn't change your genetics. So, but if someone, genetically already had really straight teeth, that would possibly be something that could be passed on as well. Exactly. So if you look here, like when it shows one person that's affected by it and one that's unaffected, so that white one, the little white color here, shows that someone's affected. So you look at all the different combinations of that. So you have a mom who's unaffected, has 2 traits there, and then a father that is affected has 1 positive and 1 negative. When you kind of give all those different combinations, it gives you, same that we saw before with eyes, a 50% chance. These 2 here, because affected is a dominant trait, these 2 have the dominant trait, so they're going to show it. But then there's also a possibility mom gives up either one of these, and dad gives up this unaffected trait. So there's a 50% chance affected versus unaffected. Notice that both my parents need braces and glasses, and I do too. So there's another example of how that gets passed on. It's pretty cool when you look at this stuff. So yeah, Kaya, that's exactly right. 50% chance when you're looking at things like this. Exactly. Okay, so I wanted to come up with some examples of this that we could do together. It's a little bit harder to do via a stream than it was when we were in class before. But what I was looking at were 3 individuals that you all might recognize: Stuart, Kevin, and Bob. I assume you all have seen the Minions movies. If not, you need to go out and see them immediately. They're great. So Stuart, Kevin, and Bob all have some pretty different features going on. So we're going to look at the different combinations of features that we could get out of Stuart, Kevin, and Bob. And we're going to do that using Punnett Squares. So first, we'll use Kevin and Bob. Let's say that we were looking at height. In this situation, being tall is dominant, so that's a big T. Being short is recessive, like a little t. So if we look at Bob, Bob is short, so we know that he has to have 2 recessive traits, right? He has to have 2 little t's. And then for Kevin, let's say Kevin's tall, and in this situation, Kevin is 2 big t's. He has dominant, dominant. So look at all of our combinations here. So if we had Kevin and Bob together, what is the % chance that they will have a tall or short offspring? I'll give you a minute to figure that out. But looking at our Punnett score we've made here, and just like we were saying before, doing lattice, you take 1 from here, so the big T goes down, then 1 from here, little t, then here, big T, little t, then here, big T, little t, big T, little t. Octane said 100% tall. Octane, that's exactly right. I agree, Kai. They're not going to get married. But I don't know. You don't know. They're minions. Who knows how they work? So let's see. Octane said it's 100% tall. That is absolutely right. Each one of them have a big T, a dominant trait going for them. So that means that all 4 of these potential offspring would all be tall. That's exactly right. Let's see. Yeah, so facial features and stuff will be different. That's right. So I want to make sure everyone's focusing on this right now. This is where we should be focusing, is on this, because this is what you all are going to be doing for your follow-up work. And if you don't fully understand this right now, the follow-up work is pretty much going to be impossible. The follow-up work is, again, like I said before, like high school level biology. So I want you all to be able to ask questions now, because the follow-up work could be pretty tough without it. So that is exactly right. There's a 100% chance that any kind of offspring would be tall. Kevin only has a dominant trait to give. So every single child is going to have a dominant trait. So they're all going to appear as tall. That's exactly right. Yep, 100%. Awesome. So let's take a look at another one. We'll do this one together. Now we've got Stuart and Bob. And what we're looking at this time is the number of eyes. If you look, Stuart has 1 eye, Bob has 2 eyes. Having 2 eyes is the dominant trait, so we have that a big E, and then having 1 eye here, like Stuart, is recessive. So who can tell me if we were doing the genotype for Stuart, if he's got 1 eye, what are his letters going to look like? How many tall letters and how many small letters? So I'll wait for someone to put that in chat. I want to make sure we're following here. What is Stuart's? What 2 possibilities does he have to give out? Exactly, Noah, little e, little e. Because he's showing the recessive trait, he cannot have the dominant trait. He cannot have a big E, so it has to be little e, little e. So looking at Stuart and Bob, Stuart is indeed little e, little e. For Bob, because he has 2 eyes, we don't know for sure. It could be big E, but in this situation, we'll say it's big E, little e. From Bob's parents, he got 1 dominant trait and 1 recessive trait. So this is our possible Punnett square now. So we'll fill this out in a second, but I want you all to take a look at it. And if you've got paper or a pencil around, you can try to write it out. So what would the Punnett square look like? What are my options? Or better yet, what are the percentage chances? What am I going to end up with? Sam says 50%. Does everyone agree with Sam, or does anyone have any other ideas? Let's see if anyone else has any thoughts. Sam, you think 50% chance of one eye, 50% chance of two eyes? All right, let's see. He says the top two are going to be dominant. Octane agrees. So we do just like our lattice here, and anytime you're writing these out, you always put the dominant trait first. So even though here I usually like to pull from the top first, because there's a dominant trait, it is always the dominant one, then the recessive one. Yeah, 50-50, exactly. So we have one dominant trait from Bob and one recessive trait from Stuart. Let's look over here. Again, one dominant trait from Bob, one recessive trait from Stuart. Let's look down here. We have a recessive from Bob and a recessive from Stuart. Recessive from Bob, recessive from Stuart. So looking at our chart, you all are exactly right. The result is there's a 50% chance of them having two eyes and a 50% chance of having one eye. That's awesome. You did a really good job there. So that's basically what we're going to be doing for our follow-up work. And we're going to do some of these together because they can get a little bit tricky. And we're going to introduce some other concepts as well. But for your follow-up work, there's a lot of really fun stuff you can do with this, because there's Punnett squares for different types of animals. There's Punnett squares for plants. You can basically create Punnett squares about just about anything, which is kind of cool. Okay, another important thing to go over is some vocabulary here. So we'll watch this video, then we'll talk about it real quick. But this is a very, very, very important thing to understand for your follow-up work. So if you have some way to take notes, this would be a very good thing to take notes on. Kaya said, are you going to send the packet you gave the other group for follow-up work? Oh, you will see. It took me forever to make, but I made a digital version of that packet. We'll go over that at the end, but I'm pretty proud of it. We'll see how it goes. So here we go, video.
Thanks for stopping by. Today we're talking about homozygous versus heterozygous alleles. This is going to be a pretty quick video, but I wanted to make it for you guys because I know it can be a tricky topic. Let's start by breaking down the terms. Anytime you encounter the term heterozygous, you should know that it's referring to two things being different or distinct from one another, whereas homozygous refers to two things being the same. Basically, hetero equals different and homo equals same. The same is true when referring to alleles. Using letters to represent alleles and referring to the most taught case of dominant versus recessive alleles, two lowercase letters, such as little b, would be a homozygous set of alleles. In this case, homozygous recessive. Big B would also be homozygous, but would be homozygous dominant because it's the dominant allele. A pairing of big B, little b would be heterozygous. You wouldn't assign dominant or recessive to the last pairing because it's the only heterozygous option, so it needs no further distinction. All right, let's do a quick recap. In dominant versus recessive alleles, if the two alleles are the same, the alleles are homozygous, the uppercase being homozygous dominant and the lowercase being homozygous recessive. If the two alleles are different, one uppercase, one lowercase, then it's heterozygous. Just heterozygous. All right, I hope this clears up any confusion.
Okay, so this, like I said, is going to be super important to the follow-up work because a lot of the questions won't give you if it's, capital, if it's, big T, or little t, or big T, little t. It'll just say one of the parents is homozygous dominant or homozygous recessive, or it is a heterozygous parent. So these words are very important to write down. Homozygous here, the word homo means same or similar, just like they said in the lesson there. And hetero means different. So if I say someone is homozygous dominant, homo means same. So think about it like same dominant. So dominant, dominant. Both letters are the exact same. So if I say someone is homozygous dominant, it means there are two capital letters there. If I say it is homozygous recessive, that means same recessive. So little t, little t. And then heterozygous is big T, little t. Ooh, Octane, that's good. We're going to talk about that in just a second. Octane said heterozygous equals hybrid. That's exactly right. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. Boy, you're You all are ahead of the curve. Heterozygous here, hetero, remember, means different, means each one is different. Big T, little t. So we would, in fact, yes, call this a hybrid, because hybrid is another word for something that's mixed or combined. So we have a hybrid one dominant and one recessive. Good. So these are very important to know. I'm going to put the PowerPoint, I'm going to put this entire PowerPoint presentation out on the stream so you can take a look at this, but these are very important words to know for doing the follow-up work, because I want to remind you, this follow-up work is complicated. I know that it's going to be difficult, but I want you all to kind of challenge yourselves with it and see how you can do with it. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about hybrids and couldn't find a good enough video, so I made a video myself. I hope it makes a lot of sense, but I wanted to use foods because that made sense to me, and I like foods, and I made a mess in my kitchen. So this video is going to talk a little bit more about the different ways that we can match things up in Punnett squares, and then it's going to talk about hybrids. So I'll watch this video, and then I'll have a chance for you all to ask any questions, and then I'll do some examples of how the follow-up work is going to go, and then we'll wrap up the lesson. So we'll go ahead and get this video started. I hope you enjoy it. So what we're going to look at are some examples of Punnett squares. The first thing we need to look at is dominant and recessive traits. Our two flavors here are going to be hot sauce, which is a strong flavor, and sour cream, which isn't as strong of a flavor. So our hot sauce is going to be our dominant gene because it's stronger, and sour cream will be our recessive gene because it's a little bit weaker. So let's see what happens when we mix these two together. Okay, we've got our crackers set up, so let's take a look at this. For the first one, let's say that both parents had the same alleles. So we have two dominant traits for one and two dominant traits for the other as well. Now we need to cross these just like we would for lattice. So the first one will get a dominant trait and a dominant trait. Then the second one, dominant, 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 dominant. So from all sides, we pulled dominant traits into each one 4 times. So in this case, they are all going to be the same. Every single one of them will look like this. Big F dominant, big F dominant. So they'll both carry the dominant flavor. Let's see what it tastes like. Yep. Ooh, spicy. Okay, so we saw what happens if we have all dominant traits. Let's see what happens if someone is carrying a recessive trait. So this time one parent is going to be dominant, dominant, so 2 big Fs. The other parent is going to be 1 big F and 1 little f, so 1 dominant and 1 recessive trait. So this time, when we come in with our dominant trait first, so we'll put it here, and 1 here, and here, and then at the bottom we get 1 dominant trait and 1 dominant trait. Now if you look on the left side, we have this recessive trait we have to handle. So we're going to come in with our recessive trait, which is 1 there, and 1 right here. So now, if you look at it, we have 2 different options. We still have our big F and big F, our 2 dominant traits, just like we had last time. But then at the bottom, we have our 1 big F and 1 little f, our 1 recessive trait at the bottom. So we pulled the big traits and then the recessive traits. Let's see what this one tastes like. It's still very good. But what I notice is I don't really taste the recessive trait very much. I mostly taste the dominant trait. So, because this one has a dominant trait in it, that dominant trait overrides the recessive one. So the feature is still really the dominant trait. Pretty cool. Okay, let's look at one that's slightly different with some more recessive traits this time, shall we? So, one parent will be dominant, recessive. The other parent is also going to be dominant and recessive. So, always do our dominant traits first. So here we go. We have a dominant and another one. Then we go across, 1 dominant here, and that's it. So now we have to deal with our recessive traits. So we have recessive here, and here, and then here, a recessive and a recessive. Aha! So now we have something new. This guy. We have 2 recessive traits in him. So on our board, we have 3 options now. We have dominant, and dominant, just like here where it's both dominant traits. Then we have dominant and recessive, like we see here and here. But then we also have a recessive, so only the recessive gene here. So if I try any of these three, because there's that dominant trait in there, I'm going to taste that dominant flavor. But this one, let's see. Very good. Not spicy at all. Pretty cool. All right, I'm starting to get full, but I do want to look at one more example of these. So let's say we have a dominant and a recessive for one parent, and the other parent is recessive. So they're carrying two recessive alleles. So we always do our dominants first, so we would have one here. Oh no! There. Then we get into our recessives. So we're going to do one here, and then this one gets one from the top and one from the left. This one gets one from the left. This one gets top and left. So look at what we've got set up now. We've got two that are showing that dominant trait and two that are showing only the recessive trait. So these two are going to display the dominant, these two will display the recessive. The important thing to remember for these is that the big symbol is our dominant symbol and the little symbol is recessive. So we're always going to experience that dominant trait if it's there. Cool. Okay, let's look at two different ingredients that will combine in a slightly different way. Our peanut butter is our dominant, and our jam, is recessive. Let's see what happens when we mix these two things together and see if we get a different result. Okay, so using our new setup, let's do one that's double dominant and one that's one dominant and one recessive. Let's see what happens when we add our ingredients. Okay, look what we've done. We've organized our Punnett square, and we see that we've got some of them at the top here that have two dominant alleles, like this one and this one, while the other ones are a mix, dominant and recessive. Remember, just like we said before, big F is dominant and little f is recessive. It's a little different here though, because these top two, if I try them, let's see. All peanut butter. Very good. But down here, let's see. Okay. It's really good. But what I'm noticing is I'm not just tasting the peanut butter alone. I'm also tasting the jelly. It's a mix of the two. So I've kind of created a brand new flavor. In this situation, we call this a hybrid. So even though we have a dominant and a recessive trait, we've mixed those two together here to create a new flavor that's got both of them in it. So let's see some more examples. Okay, in this example, let's look at some other hybrids. We still have our dominants and our recessives, and in this situation, we have two hybrids. They both have one big F and one little f, big F, little f. So let's see what happens when we combine two hybrids together. Okay, look what we've got here. Interesting. We've got a pretty good mix of stuff. We still have one that's all dominant, one that's all recessive, but then we have two that are hybrids, the same as before. They have a mix of both. We have every possible combination all mixed together here. What we end up with is a dominant, a recessive, and two hybrids. So we really have three options. We've got our pure dominant here. We've got our pure recessive here, just jam. Or we have our hybrid, just like this. This would be our hybrid because it has both in there. It's a little bit of both mixed together. So we get a mix that makes two completely new things, which is neat. All in all, pretty good snack. Who knew biology was so much fun? Okay, I hope maybe that made a little bit of sense. It gets really complicated when you start to introduce things like hybrids. Because the first example that we looked at here, where we had like hot sauce and sour cream, the dominant hot sauce is way more powerful than that sour cream. So anytime the two are mixed together, I'm really only going to taste that hot sauce. So that's a much stronger dominant. But a lot of times when you have things like that peanut butter and jelly, yes, I did eat all those crackers, Kai. It was a lot of food. When you have things like that peanut butter and jelly, there, even though peanut butter was dominant, even when that dominant trait got mixed with a recessive trait, we didn't only experience that dominant trait. We kind of got some factors of both of those. A really, really easy way to think of this, and it's an example that you'll see on the follow-up work, is like flowers. Let's say that we have red flowers and white flowers, and let's say red is dominant and white is recessive. If we have 2 red flowers that produce offspring, they both hand over a dominant trait, you're going to have red flowers. If we have 2 white flowers that both hand over a white recessive trait, you're going to have a white flower. But what if we have 1 red flower that passes over a dominant trait with 1 white flower that passes over a recessive trait? What color flower do you think you would get out of that situation? I'm going to read through these directions real quick. Hot sauce and peanut butter. Ooh, that's a good question, Sam. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Right, Noah's exactly right. So is octane. Pink. So that would be an example of when you have something that you get a hybrid. It's possible that if you had a red flower mixed with a white flower where you had 1 red dominant and 1 white recessive, you just get another red flower. If that dominant gene is really, really strong, it will just override that white gene. But for things like flowers, you get hybrids. That's exactly right. Man, you all are all over this. So proud of you all. So for the follow-up work, we're going to do a little bit of this together because, like I said, this is a very complicated assignment, and I'm more than happy to help with this. If there's enough people that feel like they want help, we could do a Discord session because I can share my screen on Discord and we could all work on it together. If there's enough people that want to do that, I'm perfectly happy to help with this. But this is a really fun assignment, but I want you guys to get a chance to experience it and run through these. So let's see. Kaya said, I did not know there was a mix that you can buy at the store. Yeah, I've had that stuff in my pantry for ages. It's called Goober. But I saw that and I was like, oh man, that's a perfect example of a hybrid. But yes, I did eat a lot of crackers. I was very full by the end of that. Okay, so I have basically taken the assignment and put it, or yeah, we could use Google Meet as well, Kaya. That's a good point. I've taken the assignment and moved it over into here as well. But when you get it, it's going to be basically identical to this. I've actually got to minimize it so we can type into it. It'll be shared with you all in the stream here shortly. But it's a Google slide that already has text boxes in it. So you can type in all of your information. So I put my name in there. And then everywhere else here, there's text boxes you can type into. So the first one is already done, but let's go through this together. Number 1, a petunia with a pure white flower, little p, is crossed with a petunia with a pure purple flower, big P, big P. What % of the offspring will have white and purple flowers? So we know from just looking at the symbols here, big P is dominant, purple. Little p is recessive, which is white, right? Because we have a white flower, little p, so we know that white is recessive. For these two as well, these are both homozygous because they're the same. So we have homozygous recessive here, homozygous dominant here. Exactly, Kaya's right. So when we do our Punnett square here, we have our homozygous dominant right here, big P, then our homozygous recessive here, little p. Then we do our lattice out, so big P, little p, big P, little p, big P, little p, big P, little p. So in all of these, we have hybrids in every single one, or we have what we call heterozygous groupings. And because we know that P is dominant, we're going to get 100% of them are going to have purple flowers. Exactly. So let's look at the second one here, number 2. A plant that produces wrinkled seeds, which is little w, is crossed with a plant that has smooth seeds, big W, little w. What % of the offspring will have smooth and wrinkled seeds? So we'll look at our first one. We know that having wrinkled seeds is recessive. And we have lowercase w, did it make those capital automatically? No, it didn't. So those are lowercase. And then the other one that has smooth seeds is uppercase, lowercase. So that's what we have there. It's a little hard to tell the difference on these, but I'm doing the best I can with what they gave me. So we do our circle out from here, or our square out from here, So we have big and little. Whoop, it doesn't quite fit, does it? So I might have to make our font smaller. Yeah. So for these, sorry, I should have tested this beforehand. you might have to make your font smaller. All you have to do is click on the square, make the font smaller. Actually, I might go through and fix this just so you all don't have to do it. So same thing here, uppercase, lowercase, and then here we get lowercase, lowercase, and then here, lowercase, lowercase. So then we want to look at all of our possible options. We know that having smooth seeds, if there's an uppercase W, that's a dominant trait, whereas lowercase is recessive. So we see 1, 2 that have a dominant trait, and 1, 2 that have a recessive trait. So that means there is going to be a 50, I have to delete that, 50% chance of each one of these, right? So 50% and 50%, exactly, 50-50. Cool. So the actual assignment is 8 slides long. Each slide just has a couple of answers on it. But you need to fill out the entire Punnett square and then put your answers in here. So for example, let's do one more together. We'll do number 4 together here because this one talks about hybrids. So in one flower, red, big R, is the dominant gene. White, little r, is the recessive. But the hybrid individual is pink. What do the offspring look like when 2 hybrids are crossed? So remember, a hybrid is going to be big R, little r. Big R, little r. And then here, big R, little r. So then we want to go through and do all of our options. So here, we get big R, here, big R, little r. Then here, big R, little r, and then little r from the top, little r from the right. So then we want to look at our different options. So we have, if we look at it here, let's see what we've got. We've got 25% chance that it's going to be red. We have here with our little r, we have a 25% chance of white. And then we have, if we see big R, little r, and big R, little r, we have a 50% chance of another hybrid. Cool. Just like that. Yep, 25, 25, 50. Exactly. So your answers over here are always going to add up to 100%, right? Because we always we're looking at out of 4. So your options really are, like we have here, 100%, 0%, or 50%, 50%, or 25, 25, 50. Or I guess you could have 75%, 25% is the other option. So like if we do this here in peas, tall plants, T is dominant over short plants, little t. What do the offspring look like when a heterozygous tall plant is crossed with a homozygous tall plant? So remember, hetero means different. So for the heterozygous one, we're going to have big T, little t, and a homozygous tall plant. Remember, homozygous means same. So then over here, we're going to have big T, big T. So we come over here and do our answers. Here we get big T, here, big T, little t, here, big T, here, big T, little t. So in this situation, because there's a big T in every single one, our chance is 100% tall and, whoops, moved my box on accident, 0% short. Cool. All right, so we did those first 2 pages together. Like I said, if you all need any other help, please let me know. This is a pretty complicated thing. The first 4 pages, I'll talk about plants. The next page after that talks about animals. It uses horses for some examples. Then it talks about cats and some dogs. And the very last 2 pages talk about people. This is one where Sam asked a question earlier. He said, what if there are 2 different types of dominant genes? That's a really good one to look at here. So I'll actually do this one together real quick because this answers that question. A man, XY, marries a woman, XX. Construct a Punnett square that shows the gender of their offspring. So if you look, there are no lowercase letters here, right? So both of them are dominant. So we have XY from that man, and then we have XX from that woman. And I've got to make these 11 again. I think the assignment might already be up on the stream, but give me a little bit to fix it so that you all don't have to do that part. So let's construct out our Punnett square here. So here we have XX, here we have XY, here we have XX, and then here we have XY. So in this situation, if it's all dominant, If it's all dominant traits like that, if we know XX equals a woman, XY equals a man, so we have 2 XYs, 2 XXs. So that means it is a 50% chance of male, 50% chance of female. So Sam, that answers your question from earlier. If you have all dominant traits, no recessives, that's what it's going to look like there. So, cool. We did some of those together. Give me like 5 minutes to update the assignment, because I think it's already up in the stream, so don't open it immediately. Give me a few minutes. I'll repost it after I've made some changes to the fonts here. But you all are welcome to work together on this. Like I said, if you need help, you can ask me for help. I'm happy to help out with that if you need it. Yes, Kai, if you've got a question, go ahead. So, what is next week's lesson? That is a good question, which I'm not going to answer yet. I have some ideas for next week's lesson, because we're caught up with what I did with the other group. So we get to do something different. We'll find something fun and new to do for next week. So I think we talked a little bit about viruses before. We might do another lesson about viruses, maybe, or the way that medicine works against viruses. So we'll see. I need to look around and see kind of what else we want to do for biology. That sounds fun. So I will be in Discord if you all need help with any of this stuff. Give me, like I said, 5 minutes. Don't open the new assignment until 11 o'clock, just so I have plenty of time to get it changed over and set up. So thank you all very much for joining. This was fun. I will let you know about the lesson for next week. But for now, you all can hang out in here for just another minute while I get this assignment updated, and then you can get started on that and let me know if you have any questions. So enjoy the rest of y'all's day, and I'll talk to you later.